Hello, everyone. Welcome back to eXp Family Tree. If you guys are watching live, I see some of you. Hello to you guys. You can join us live on Zoom if you want to. Just go to my Zoom link, which I will post below this live stream as we're discussing. So please come on into the conversation if you can. We are live here every Tuesday and Wednesday for the rest of May. Remember, for all of our masterminds and trainings with guests like Mr. Bill Beck, who's with us today. And in June, July, August, it's going to be Wednesdays only for the summer. So make sure that you look at the end of this month. We'll go ahead and put out our Wednesday schedule so that you can make sure that you attend. We still will be doing every single Monday for revenue share if that's interesting to you. And that's going to be throughout the whole summer as well. So just a quick reminder. All right. So, hey, Matthew, nice to see you again. So today we are going to be talking about the top 10 markets for short-term rental investment opportunities with Bill Beck. Bill's going to give a little introduction to himself so you know where he comes from, and then we're going to dive right into it. Bill, you already have access to share screen if you need to, and so we'll just take it away, and then you guys don't be shy, ask questions, raise your hand, chat in the chat box. I will monitor the live stream if anybody's chatting there for you, Bill, too, and we'll get into the conversation. This is a big deal. If you have a database at all, to be able to share with them where they might want to invest in real estate in the vacation rental market, because it is still extremely healthy. Lots and lots of people are putting their money in that market. And maybe it's not your local market, but that's okay, because if you go to your database and tell them, I know the top 10 markets, if you're open to investing in real estate in a place that you don't live, or maybe a place you want to travel to, I can help you. And then we can be intertwined here within the eXp infrastructure to give and receive referrals to each other and help each other out and be connected with those that know how to work with short-term rental investors. It's literally another whole section of your business that you could take advantage of that you might not even think about. And so that's why I like this conversation. And, so hopefully you'll like it too. All right, Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Cari. Excited to be here. Obviously, this topic is something that I actually propose as a thing that I could talk about all day long, because I used to work as a vacation rental buying consultant. So I worked with buyers all across the country at a company called Evolve Vacation Rental. So headquartered in Denver. This is before I became a real estate agent. So how I actually became a real estate agent, but I was telling people where to buy these things, and I was like, man, I need to become a real estate agent, because this is such a big investment in this sub asset class that's brand new, and maybe people don't know how this works. Because the reality is, I mean, this whole way that people are traveling has changed so much, from everyone having to use phone book and using a timeshare and getting hotels, to this whole internet and Airbnb thing. And that's what really intrigued me. So I was initially on a sales side over at Evolve, basically selling the service for management across the country. And then I just saw a lot of properties that they were managing, and it really was an epiphany when I was like, holy moly, this guy has a cabin in this part of the world that, let's see what it made. Yeah, he bought it for $180,000 and it's making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Wow, how come no one's come in here and just bought up all these things? This is crazy. So that's why I was like, I need to be the most knowledgeable person on this subject that's ever lived on the face of the earth. So I dove right in, and became a really awesome opportunity to just say, hey, anybody who wants to buy these things, give them to me. I'll use our company's data. We'll dive in, we'll look, all the things you have to be aware of when you're buying a vacation rental. First and foremost is the vacation rental regulations, because if you are in a market that people want to go to, that's awesome. But if people can't go there because the city doesn't allow these things, well, then how are you going to make it work? Because if you get, a cease and desist letter, that's not good. So regulations is kind of one of the very first topics that kind of starts to play into it, but also occupancy, right? I mean, you got to have fundamentally people that want to go to this particular area. So, there's huge swaths of our country that you kind of maybe have a cabin and go to and visit occasionally, but it's like, is there some sort of tourism draw? Is this an area that has special events at certain times of the year? Or is it like one event? Or is it literally just, it's by a national forest and that's it? Or is it even just in the middle of nowhere? So that occupancy curve, as it's called, that month over month, how many people stay here as a percentage, it's different from a In long-term rentals, they talk about, vacancy. In vacation rentals, it's assumed that you're not going to get it booked. So it's an occupancy rate. So that's something that, really strong markets, you want to see, at least 6 months a year. But really, if you're trying to get to the best ones, you want to have strong occupancy through at least 8, 9, 10 months of the year. There are very few like 12-month markets that are like 80, 90% occupied, maybe like Hawaii, but then there's property prices out there that are exorbitant, and there's regulations too. So I think for this topic, it's like, we have the top 10, which we can obviously get into, but really it's not so much just exactly 10. It's almost like there's a couple that are really at the top, and then it starts to get, depending on what the investor's looking for, depending on their budget, it can kind of broaden out from there. So I also like to do like, what's the like places that people would think would be good that are actually like, let's start with the places that you should just be very aware of, because I think people, like, for example, Las Vegas, that's an area that people are like, well, that'd be great for vacation rental, right? Like, people go there and it's like, well, there's casino lobbyists there that, they don't want vacation rentals really butting in on their market share. So they actually have a ton of regulations there that those lobbyists have been able to get passed and through. And like, there are like occasionally ways you can get a permit, but I remember I probably worked with 100 people that were trying to get a vacation rental in Vegas and they just couldn't do it. So it's one of those that was like, this is one of those markets that's really a challenge to do it for. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just like, it's just really, really hard. Big cities too. So that's something that Kansas City, in fact, they just put out a restriction against vacation rentals in certain neighborhoods. This just happened like at least like a week or week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So I've always had the opinion that when you've got a tourism market that needs the tourists to come in and the economy is dependent on it, obviously that they're going to have a hard time putting in regulations that are going to eliminate people coming there. But with big cities, it's like, well, you've got mixed needs for people that live there, people that are traveling there, people that work there for whatever industries are being represented by that city. So if you got, people who have got riffraff, you get your aldermen and whatnot that are going to get upset. And eventually, I just think big cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, I mean, there are people doing it, but for the standalone property that you can get, it's just really hard to try and find something. So it's not impossible. It's just like, from the ease of getting into it, those are really, really a challenge. A lot of the ski markets are interesting too, because they have this dynamic of, well, people want to go there. So like, one of the biggest ones is Breckenridge. So Summit County. So Summit County, lots and lots and lots of vacation rentals. But when there's snow there, it's great. When there's not snow there, it's like, well, then it's going to rent in the off season, right? Kind of, because I'll just drop my rates. It's like, nobody goes there. When it's mud season or the shoulder seasons, it's brutal. So they only end up having, 3 to 4 months solid in their peak season, then maybe a little 2-3 month window in summer. But you factor in how expensive it is to get one of those places. It's generally what I would say is not investment grade, because it's just not going to cash flow because of the cost of acquisition, because there's people that just want to have it in general. So the biggest thing with vacation rentals too is like running the numbers, crunching the data, doing the spreadsheets, right? That's the big thing that makes this different from just buying a second vacation home, because you are in the game to essentially try to make the asset produce money to either at least fully pay for itself or try to cash flow. I know right now in our 2023, with prices where they're at, cash flow is becoming like not something you just go out and print money just by picking up any property in a general market. So that's gotten, the game's gotten a little more challenging. So, but you definitely are not trying to get in this to lose boatloads of money. So, on that note too, like another area that you're just like, okay, that obviously makes sense is like the Northeast US, like coastal region. So you get that the combination of high cost to acquire homes that are close to water, which people either want to live there again or have as a second home, But when you factor in that there's seasonality, because if you're in, Maine or Cape Cod, Hamptons, Jersey Shore, like once you're above that, like Virginia Beach area into that northeast part of the country, the seasonality really kicks your butt. So it's like you've got your May, June, July, August, and then no one goes there because, again, when they have the saturation, and that's always the swear word in vacation rental land is saturation. But when you do have a ton of vacation rentals and it's off season, it's like, well, how are you going to get this thing rented? I mean, there are certain markets, which we'll talk about here in a sec, that I think are really intriguing because you can do a hybrid model where you short-term rent it 6 months, and then 6 months you can go get a long-term lease with traveling nurse or people looking to relocate. Certain markets are like ideal for that. So yeah, and then some random ones like Florida Keys. Like, who would have thought? Like, Florida Keys is like, it's gorgeous. It's like the most Caribbean area of the US. This should be like a top spot, and there are vacation rentals there, but Marathon County is like, they basically just were like, we don't want too many of these. If you got one, you're grandfathered in. And there's like one island, I think, in the whole island chain that allows you to maybe get one now, but to go and get one set up from right now is almost impossible. So, and then Portland, that's another city that they had allowed vacation rentals. They went and shut them down. The Big Island in Hawaii, there were people that had those there, and then locals just hated it. So again, trying to figure out where are these markets that, okay, we've got tourism. This is something we want to keep around for a long time. We don't want to get rid of them. So that's where we really kind of get into some thoughts. So do you guys know what AirDNA is? Has anyone heard of AirDNA? So AirDNA is kind of a play off of Airbnb, and they run analytics for vacation rentals. They're literally purely a data software. So I'm going to share my screen just so we could show you. Like what their thoughts are, because they actually run the full analysis on these different markets all over the country. I have a subscription, so if you wanted to plug in an address for the area that you've purchased, you can see what is the projected revenue. AirDNA is like something that everyone throws around on investor forums for short-term rentals, and they do a list of their top picks. So I thought it was really intriguing for 2023. All of these picks, I was like, what? Like, this does not make sense to me. Like, how the heck? I'm sure it's just because it's based on, there are vacation rental Airbnbs and properties all over the country, and they've got this aggregated data, and they're seeing this like acquisition price to revenue ratio where they're like, okay, that these kind of areas are potentially up and coming. But I'm actually going to argue them and say, most of these are probably not going to fly. Like Fairbanks, Alaska, we're talking about like highly seasonal areas that just don't do well. Again, I anecdotally worked with people that were looking at Alaska, and it's like, well, when it's like dark for huge swaths of the year and it's freezing, it's like, this is not something that, it just doesn't fit the occupancy mold. Again, you want to have like a flat or at least a peak season with a second season. You don't want it to be just down and then up and then down, because it's like your holding period on this asset where you don't have months where you're getting bookings is hard to overcome. So I don't know, Fairbanks, that didn't do it for me. And I used to live in Illinois, so Rockford, my parents still live up there. My uncle works for Bunn, the coffee making company in Springfield. These are both like very much like, they're large-ish cities with like populations of six-figure populations, but they're not big cities. They just don't have a huge amount of things to attract people there, in my opinion. So these are for maybe if you're local and you want to go ahead and give it a shot. But I don't think anything on this list is really like, you need to go to this market right now because this is where people are making huge amounts of money with these investments. And you can see it's a lot in the Northeast too. So I think this is just one of these lists that they use, again, by pulling data anecdotally from a handful of properties, and now they've thrown it out there. And I'm sure you could probably go make some pretty amazing returns in these markets for 2023, But then it becomes a question of like, is this something that's going to be regular, or was this a little blip that someone bought here and now prices are going to go up in these respective areas, but there's really no fundamental draw that's bringing them there. So that's like the biggest concern I've got. So here's AirDNA's list for 2023. Again, I used to work at Evolve, and they have their 12 best places to buy vacation rentals. So this one's a little closer because I think there's a little bit of legacy carryover of what I learned when I was there. Now, there's probably some Evolve internal bias because the properties that they manage are going to be limited to the ones that they've actually been able to sell people to bring on. So there's that bias, but also you get people that are telling the marketing team, okay, these are our opinions on this. So just be aware of that, because they're going to show, I don't know how deeply that they really ran the analysis on this. This could have been like an aggregate median relative to aggregate revenue median. So it's like, okay, kind of this. It's hard to do that though, right? Because this topic, it's like, well, where do I get the best cash on cash return? It's like, that doesn't mean anything. You cannot ask that question. You can't just say, where is the best cap rate? Because it's like, we got to talk about like specific property in a specific area to answer that question. Because if you're just doing such a vague question, you're going to get a vague answer. So that was one of those things that really bugged me, because it's like, I get how you run a model on how to create a cap rate or calculate cash on cash return. But for cash on cash return, for example, it's like, well, I don't know how to tell you that, because what are you assuming for your lending situation? Are you doing 10% down, 20% down? Are you doing cash deal? Like, obviously your cash return, if you buy the whole place with cash after expenses, it's going to be different because you don't have a loan. But then it's like, what does that look like? But then people are, well, I want to use my 10% down loan. And so I'm going to get off my rant here, because that's like a whole other topic. So Wisconsin Dells, really interesting pick as their number one. Wisconsin Dells is one of these drivable tourism destinations located in northern, kind of central Wisconsin, water park capital of the world. I'll just pull up some real quick info on the area. I've been here. Again, my family lives in northern Illinois. This is an area with lots of water parks. It's not a huge amount of tourism as far as like throughout the course of the year, because it is in Wisconsin, and that does get affected by cold temperatures that happen there. But that's why they do have these indoor water parks. So I would also beg the question that if the indoor water parks like Great Wolf Lodge, this one's Kalahari, are what's drawing people, does a vacation rental really do well? Because if that's what's the thing that's creating tourism draw, is these water parks where people are supposed to stay at. I mean, maybe they do have the ability to get their own pass or wristband to stay and go to these water areas or water park areas. So this one was never really, like, in my opinion, like up there. It was also hard to get people to work there, because it's just not a huge population base to draw from. So you also want to factor in, what is your operational risk for cleaners, handymen, specialists like electricians, plumbers, HVAC people? Because if you were to buy a place that absolutely the numbers are going to crush it, you're going to have, insane amount of occupancy, low cost to acquire. It's going to look amazing on a spreadsheet, and you're going to be like, awesome, I should do this all day long. Nothing's going to go wrong. And then you're like, okay, I got the thing now. Who's going to like run it? Because it's in, whatever part of the country. It's like, well, that's a good question, because if there's not a robust number of people there that can actually physically operate your place, then you kind of are in a pinch for the situation. So that was something in Wisconsin Dells I do recall being like, there's not a huge number of cleaning companies. It wasn't brutally terrible. Like certain places, like you just flat out can't find people, like towards the border of Canada and Minnesota. Like that is like straight up, you're out of luck, because there's nobody lives there, right? So good luck. Maybe we can like have chat GPT like create like a robot that like takes care of stuff in the future. But for now, we're kind of stuck. Lead, South Dakota. This was an interesting one, because this is like right in the Black Hills, South Dakota, Mount Rushmore. They've got Sturgis. So this one's really intriguing just because prices are relatively cheap. People do go here. The Dakotas, for the most part, not even worth looking at all for investment purposes, except for this area, because this is like one of the places that people will travel to and check out for, tourism reasons. Gatlinburg, this is like the Smoky Mountains, the original OG. Like, this is where you should go to buy a cabin to make, huge investment returns. Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Sevierville. This was on my list as like always number one, because it had strong occupancy throughout the course of the year. This was an area that you look at, it's here tucked in the Smoky Mountains. You've got a huge amount of attractions that are on this main drag through town. It's actually like a 6-lane highway. If you look at the topography of it, I mean, all you see are family-friendly attractions with, the Titanic Museum, Dollywood, the island, all of these things that are people. I mean, it's one of the I think it's the #1 most visited national park in the US as well. So you've got this huge, amazing rock trails up here, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So between Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Sevierville, and the funny thing with Sevierville too is it's all of the surrounding area. So if someone has a property up here, it might even technically be in Sevierville. But one of the things that makes properties here tick is you got to have a cabin and having some views. And then it becomes too, like, what amenities do you want? So hot tub, that's a huge amenity you should definitely have because all of your neighbors have them. Now, this one, the word has gotten out on Gatlinburg. So everybody's queued up. A lot of people made a ton of money here. So I don't want to say that there's not it's just not easy as it was 4 or 5 years ago to get. And that's for every market. But this was perennially the #1 place I push people. And it's hard to argue with that because of the cost to acquire and the regular business they were seeing there. So moving right along, Windham, New York. So the kind of the Catskills area. This was always really interesting because you look at the Northeast and you start to see similarities in terms of like, okay, we've got people that are in New York. So you've got a huge population base. Well, where are they going to go take trips to that are drivable? Because, there's a huge number of people that live in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and some of these driving destinations that are nearby, the Catskills area. So it's just a little bit up the way. You've got the same sort of thing, Woodstock, like from the famous Woodstock, that's actually one of the top spots. So this whole entire area in the Catskills, people just go here in droves, and it's steadily occupied. A lot of cabin type properties that do really well, not a ton of regulations. So it's like really one of the top areas to check out. One of the places that actually shocked me, that was like truly one of the markets that was like, what, was the Poconos. So Gatlinburg was always my number 1. Hey, go ahead, Matthew. I think you're muted.
No, I already know how. No, I had a realtor friend from Phoenix who, I swear to God, she was like, had a crystal ball. So years ago, she bought a small little cabin in Gatlinburg, and back then it was making like $46,000 a year.
Yeah.
And now she's posting, she's totally retired, living in Florida, has all these investment properties, but she's building a new one there in the Smoky Mountains. She's showing pictures. I think that's just her big moneymaker of anything.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? For that market, it's like everyone does really, really well. So it's this situation where they have that story where they're like telling their friends about it, and then those friends go and buy, and then those friends go and buy, and then everyone's wanting one, and it's like, well, there's nothing to buy except for this one that's like 900,000. So that, I don't want to say that there are opportunities there. It's definitely a good one. The Pocono Mountains, this was another one of these markets that, again, that shocked me, because it was like, okay, Gatlinburg, kind of get it, but the Poconos, I was like, I don't get it. It's just this like region in Pennsylvania that's kind of close to New York, to Philadelphia, where, you know, you've got a bunch of these houses that are, I mean, they're really kind of, I don't know how to explain it. They're just like kind of like built in the 70s style homes that are really just, you know, shrug worthy. Yeah, here, see, like this is like, okay, like this is your standard poke. This is the #1 result on VRBO too, right? So it's like the VRBO algorithms are always popping up the ones as the first result, just like Google and Amazon. Like it's conversion rate based. So this one does phenomenally well for it to be placed #1. But these houses, I mean, it's like you've got, you know, just a large-ish house with your private areas. I mean, you know, some degree of furnishing, refurbishing, you know, game room area. That's always a clue that places is doing it right when you've got the game room. So, but looking at their calendar, I mean, we've already started to see bookings coming in. I mean, I guarantee they're going to get more here shortly. So, the Poconos has a mix of lakes. There's actually skiing there. So Lake Ariel all the way down to Mount Pocono, Lake Harmony, Arrowhead Lake. I mean, these are all like vacation rental communities. Now they are starting to do a little bit more regulations here recently. Like I think it was Mount Pocono, like they started, but this is just something you always got to work with a good realtor on to be cued in on. Okay, what's the latest? What are the rules? Because you don't want to step on a landmine, blow your leg off by buying something that you can't use. So this is just one of these markets that, you know, I mean, when I was first identified it, you could get like a 4-bedroom house for under $190,000. So, and it's just, you know, property prices are obviously appreciated pretty significantly, but this is just one of these markets that people still have on their radar, and it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. So it's like always in the back of my mind, it's like that's one of these areas that definitely want to always consider. Back to the Evolves list, Savannah. Not sure, not real strongly opinion on Savannah. Bryson City, this one's kind of like if you look at back at Gatlinburg too, what's happening is a lot of these vacation rental markets are seeing the periphery or close markets to that area that are seeing strong vacation rental demand. So if you look at the Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Sevierville, it's kind of, this is the epicenter. But then this whole Asheville, Waynesville, Bryson City, I mean, Western North Carolina mountains, it's a similar play. So they don't have the same proximity to those attractions, but you've got the same, you know, remote cabin with good seasonality where it's in the southeast portion of the United States. It's not getting crazy winter weather. You've got huge population centers that you can draw from based on proximity to the East Coast. And you know, Bryson City, where the prices were, again, you could get over to Gatlinburg if you wanted relatively easily. It's not a massive drive, but you can still have your own private experience. So this area was always really good alternative for maybe someone was like, okay, I gave up looking over in Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge. Let's try Maggie Valley, or let's try, you know, one of these Bryson City, any of these areas. Again, got to have a good realtor to kind of pinpoint what are ones that are a little too far away. And also, this is the same thing where it's like you start to get a little too far away. You got to be worried about who is the person going to take care of this, because you may have someone who's like, yeah, I'm a cleaner in Maggie Valley. You're like, cool, I've got one in you know, Almond. They're like, well, I don't go there because that's like a 45-minute back, you know, trip to get out there. And it's like, okay, well, who do I use? They're like, well, we got one person, but I don't know if they're still cleaning anymore. And you're like, oh, so definitely a conversation that you want to have early with all the parties involved of the decision making of the investment. So there's the Poconos. Branson, here's my market. So I actually moved out to Branson. Branson is extremely similar to Gatlinburg in terms of it being a drivable tourism destination. That we have about 10 million tourists per year that come out here. This was my #1 place. I told people if you had a budget, you know, less than $300,000, it's hard to beat Branson. because we have really, really, really cheap inventory. So we've got vacation rentals all day long. We've got about 5,000 vacation rentals in our general area. Prices range from, I mean, you can get one today for sub 100,000. That'd be a 1-bedroom. But you know, bread and butter would be $250,000 condos that are, you know, the majority of what people are coming here and staying at. So Branson, similar occupancy curve to Gatlinburg, which kind of blew my mind. It's like runs the same. January, February is quiet. March, there's this uptick to spring break. So, you know, 40-50% occupancy in March. April, it dips a little bit. So maybe like 30%. You're getting most of your weekends booked. And then you get to May, it starts to like all your weekends in the first half of May go, and then you start to see big chunks happen in the second half, week long, and pretty much Memorial Day through the second week of August. It's like 100% booked here, absolutely peak season. And then what's awesome about Branson, because people see, okay, there's a lake here, so there's lake activities, you can go boating, go fishing. But we also have our strip, which has all the same attractions that Gatlinburg had. Yes, Matthew.
I sold some property in Branson. Like I sold 3 lots. I want to say they were under 3 acres each, buy some water. I went in on a weekend just to sell some property for a land developer, but it was awesome. And that was years ago. I don't think people paid more than 15 or 16,000 for those lots back then, maybe 10 years
Fire
ago.
sale every day here in Branson, right? So that is the thing, right? It's like, this is one of these areas that we've got a developed tourism destination. As far as like, this is not something that's just started up. It's been around for decades. We've got whole industries for cleaning people, HVAC people, electricians, plumbers. So I've actually had at my investment property that I own, water heater go out on a Friday night. And it's like, oh man, but get the plumber, get it taken care of. Guests are happy, write you a review, say, hey, we took care of it. Super excited. Yes, Matthew.
I forgot to take it
Taking
down.
hands down. Okay, cool. So Branson, again, what I identified it to people is, hey, it's one of these areas that if you want to get started, there's a lot of turnkey inventory. Like you can go buy one of these like today and pick it up, and it's gonna be fully furnished. And if you're out of state, you want to, you know, get started with something where you're not, you know, spending an arm and a leg across the country to go do, like, this is a great place to start. So Granbury, Texas. Yep, Texas lakes were on my list. Absolutely, shout out to those. So Granbury, a lot of, you know, certain markets, like if you have a lake market, people always want to be like mountains, lakes, or the ocean. So with Granbury, where you're looking at it, you've got a huge population of Dallas-Fort Worth that you're drawing from, and everyone talks about Lake Granbury. So this is like the destination that, you know, people are crushing it out here. Also, considering that it's in Texas, the weather is going to be either warm, hot, super hot, maybe mildly chilly. Like, you just have that advantage. So if you're in like Brainerd Lakes, Minnesota, shout out to Cari, you know, people are like, well, what about the ice fishing, or what about the snowmobilers? It's like, yeah, but what about most people that don't want to do that? Because it gets harder when you've got wife that's like, yeah, I don't like being frozen. I'd rather just not. Let's go to a beach or a lake that's not freezing. So this is really a strong factor. And then it's close to water. You're close to a huge population center. You've got weather to your advantage. Like, this is a great spot. And then Ruidoso, New Mexico. Yeah, that was a good one that was always up there. But let me pull some. So what's not on the Evolve list and what's not on the AirDNA list is like the ones that I like was cued into, that were like, okay, these would be my personal top picks. And again, I know it should have been the top 10 this whole time, just me, but I like to get different perspectives, because it's like we could break down each one of them and kind of.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had somebody ask a question in the Facebook workplace group. what are the emerging markets, or what markets would you say we could bring to our databases, our spheres, our other investors, and say, hey, you might not have thought of this, but and I know you've given some perspectives of some here that maybe we haven't had, but that was a question, so you're probably getting to it.
Yeah, the emerging markets, it's funny because like as soon as you say it, like it blows up. So it's almost more like the ones that don't get as much press. So like the main ones that everybody is like aware of would be like the Emerald Coast, so like Destin, Florida. I'm just gonna rattle these off real quick, like Cape Coral. I always like Cape Coral, Florida, because it's kind of one of those areas that you don't have beaches, which is the downside, but the property prices weren't as terrible as a lot of the other beach markets in Florida. And then in Cape Coral, a lot of the properties have like your own private pool, and regulations are pretty friendly in Cape Coral. And it's just one of these areas that, if you look at Florida too, you get a lot of snowbirds that go down to southern Florida in the winter because it is, perfect weather in the winter. But if it's summertime, people don't go to southern Florida as often because it's actually like brutally hot there. You go to more of a northern Florida. Whereas if you're like in the central portion, that is actually has a stronger kind of a month over month occupancy curve. So okay, so like peripheral markets, Alma, Fairplay. This was always in my top areas to look at. So we talked about Breckenridge earlier being like, this is an area that has a lot of vacation rentals, high degree of people go here in the peak season, then people don't go here when it's not snowing. Well, a peripheral market, if you go down the road, is Alma Fairplay. So this is right in front of some of the world's most incredible looking 14ers, Mount Sheridan, South Peak. Like this is like mountain climber heaven. And you're only like, I don't know, 30 minutes away from Breckenridge. So you could get an absolute killer cabin up in one of these little areas that you're paying the equivalent of like a condo up in the Breckenridge area, but you've got your own standalone property, and you sleep more heads in beds, more heads, larger price you can charge. Plus, if you look at where it's located on the map, you're still within proximity of Denver. So you're going to get people that are flying into Denver's airport, which is this northeast part of the city. Well, they're not going to want to like get in a rental car and drive, 4, 5, 6 hours to get to, Grand Junction or Telluride. I mean, these places are so buried within the state. It's like such a pain to get to. Whereas if you're like, oh, well, it's only like, it's like a 2.5 hour drive to get there, 2 hour drive if you're, lucky with traffic. I mean, it's like very, very accessible to get from that airport. So that's one of those areas that like, I wouldn't say it's like an absolute killer deal because I think there's not enough housing inventory there. But it is one of those areas that you kind of look at the fundamentals and it makes sense. Winter Park. The one thing too about Colorado is they are starting to get a little more heavy with their regulations. So it's again, talk to your realtor to be like clued in on what's happening. So Arizona, we'll pop over there. Arizona, everybody knows about Phoenix. Phoenix was actually one of the most like vacation rental friendly cities. As long as you don't get something in an HOA, you can have a really, really successful vacation rental here. High degree of seasonality though, because you get people that come here November, December, January, February, March, a little bit of April, and no one goes there when there's so many and it's super hot. I mean, it's 130 degrees outside. I don't want to be there. I'm like gonna like sunburn in like a matter of 10 seconds if I go there. So this is what is like the perfect area to go do the hybrid model. So hybrid model is where you get a vacation rental close to like a hospital. And then you just, get yourself, hold on. Let's do Phoenix Hospital. So try to find one of these hospitals. You're like, okay, there's a bunch here. in this general vicinity. So it's like, does it make sense to go and get yourself a, get whatever type of property that when you're not renting it for your vacation rental people, you've got this other way to rent it out to people. Or there's traveling people that are trying to relocate to Phoenix. And it's like, well, we got to move now because my job needs me there today. We just, don't have a house yet, or we haven't sold our other ones. So we need like 2, 3, 4 months to like stay somewhere. It's like, boom, perfect opportunity to like use the medium term rental, which is a whole other thing. Obviously, long-term lease is like 12 plus months, month at a time. Short-term rentals, anything less than 30 days. Midterm is that, month at a time, 2 months at a time, 3 months at a time. So that's
And the
really,
Phoenix area is absolutely very, very, very big for traveling nurses. I know multiple people that own multiple midterm rentals there because of that, specifically market to traveling nurses. So you could, Google search what other areas are there a lot of traveling nurses, what hospitals bring on a lot of traveling nurses, and specifically market your property to those people and be full all the time.
yeah, because everybody uses like Airbnb or VRBO or maybe booking.com as their OTA of choice for renting their short-term rental. There's a lot of other resources for you to specifically target people that need that midterm lease or that midterm usage. So that's just a way to like open your mind up as an opportunity. Arizona was interesting too, because it had a lot of, speaking of peripheral markets. So Sedona, that was one of these most like flattest occupancy curves in the country, as in like 70% every single month over month over month, every single month, which was wild. Because I was like, I never would have guessed that. Like just this random place with gorgeous rocks that sees people here in huge volumes. There's no down season there. There's no like peak season either, because it's always peak season there. So, but Sedona is incredibly difficult to get your hands on one. Plus the prices have gone up pretty significantly. So some of these other opportunities, like this Pine Top Lakeside Show Low area, again, kind of that same play on mountain homes that are, kind of off most people's radar, but a good area that has pretty strong performance there. But there's gonna be a little bit more seasonality than Sedona. Another one would be like, okay, well, if you're not in Sedona, well, what if you're like in like Cottonwood? And it's like, that could be an interesting play too. It's just the farther away you get from like the main area that people want to be, there's just a higher degree of risk in terms of like, well, what is the annual like occupancy going to look like year over year? Because there could be a year where you're like, man, I got like 250 nights booked, and then last year I did like 170. What happened? It's like, well, maybe you got to pick an area where it's a balance of like, okay, you pay to be close to an area that has a lot of attractions that are year over year, like conventions or festivals or you name it. But if it's an area that's like kind of next door to them, that's where you really have to use a property that you almost have to amenitize, because some of the most amazing vacation rental properties, just period, are ones that are so amenitized. It's like, it's hard not to like want to stay there. They've got themes, they've got, hot tubs, pools, high-end kitchens, like grills, barbecue smokers, fire pits. It's like when you're ticking all of these boxes and you're adding creative little what I call like peacocking things, which is like you stand out in a cool way because you're doing something different from what everyone else is doing. Like I remember seeing like high performing cabins that have like deer antler railings. It's like, well, that's weird. It's like, well, but it caught my attention, and it obviously is one of those places that does super, super well. Or even light fixtures. I've seen people make custom light fixtures with like a upside down canoe, and the lights like pop through it over the kitchen table. It's like, it's weird, but weird is good. This is vacation rental. This is not your house. Like anybody who has like a vacation home that, it's like cool. It like has a lot of gray tones and really high end like light fixtures, and everything's cool backsplash. But it's like, it's a cool residential home. You got to do this a little bit differently. You got to stand out. Maybe throw up some wild wallpaper, wallpaper is not in. Guess what? If it's a wallpaper mural that's like super high end and nice, that actually might pick up people's attention. Or fire pits, like, do a nice custom, like built one, or just anything that your neighbors aren't doing. Because the more you make the place like stand out and different, the more people are just going to eat it up. So it's hard to tell a lot of people that in this industry, when everyone wants more of like a data, black and white, what are the numbers, it's like part of the originality is the ability to create and like do this, amazing thing that you're leveraging your own creative way to go about creating experiences for people to go help them, have an enjoyable time with their family and friends. So
I love that. Yeah, creativity is really key. So remember, like if you're working with long-term investors, they might say, oh, no, I'm not interested in vacation rentals, but they don't understand it. Many vacation rentals will actually cash flow them much more than a long-term rental, but they think that it's a lot of work and they don't really understand it. And so being able to educate yourself so you can just let people know, look, there's other options. You may want to keep some long-term, but have you thought about midterm? Have you thought about short-term rentals as well? Because if you're open to geographically designing your investment, portfolio, there are places that you can purchase properties very inexpensively and have massive cash flow, but you do have to understand some things about that. And the way you market and the way you stage and the way you set up your short-term rental is going to be very different than you, of course, do for a long-term or even a midterm. And those are little things as a real estate expert, I think that you should become familiar with so that you can help your current investor clients, but also your other sphere of influence that want to become investors, that want to build, wealth in real estate and don't know how, maybe live in these areas, maybe want to vacation to these areas. And how could they purchase a property, stay in their own property when they vacation there, or eventually want to retire there, but in the meantime, actually cash flow and build wealth. And this is just a great way to get back in contact with your database and just talk to them about something that you've maybe never talked to them about before. So Bill, we have 5 minutes to wrap up. So how do you want to end the call? And then
I
have Bill
totally
back
forgot
and
about
talk a
this.
little bit more specifically about maybe the numbers around vacation rentals as well. So watch for that coming up because Bill's going to do another session. But
yeah, this is one of these things I had queued up as a resource if it needed to come up, but I will let people do their own due diligence. This is the Evolve Vacation Rental Performance Reports Library, as it's called now. They literally have these different areas of the country that they've put out. I'm glad they've added a ton of them since I used to work there. I mean, I used to have to anecdotally talk about it, and there was only like 15 of these. And now they've got, like I was saying for Sedona, it's like your worst month is August, which is still like, maybe 40% occupancy. It's like, but every other month, 60, close to 80, close to 100. And then it's just stays high. So there it is a little up and down, but you're never going that low. And then not to knock on Minnesota, but like, look, this is the Brainerd area. It's like you've got May, June, July, August, and it's like, okay, like 20s, 40s. So it's like, it's really interesting to see all of these areas that you really start to dive into, like how often people go there and what the prices are. That creates your top of the line number. And then you just factor in what are the local expenses, which becomes its own other topic. And that's ultimately like, is this something that's going to pay for itself or make me money? Or is it something that, is going to be a huge loss and not something you want to get into? So definitely encourage people to check this out. But yeah, open to questions too, Cari.
Those of you that work with investors or maybe want to get into short-term rental investing yourself, or that want to talk to your sphere of influence about this, any questions that you have while we have Bill on the call for a couple more minutes, unmute yourself and let us know. Or chat in the chat box. I've been monitoring the live because we've had a number of people watching live. We just had the one question about emerging markets, so you already answered that one. So anybody else have anything here?
I did have a question. I'm just kind of surprised that I don't see Puerto Rico on there. Would you know the occupancy percentage for it? Because I just got my license there, and that's exactly why I'm going to target that area.
That's a great question. You know, I would say that I don't know enough to say one way or another. Like it's not a bad area. I've been to Puerto Rico. I love it there.
Yeah.
It becomes I guess one of the main questions is there a ton of Airbnb and VRBO
Mhm.
like bookings as far as the percentage of total people that are traveling there?
Mhm.
So that becomes just something to check into further.
Mhm.
But also too, I don't know if they have any zoning there. So that's something that is a good question. So I wouldn't say good or bad either way. It's just more of a, we need to find out more before we make a decision.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that we should look in workplace, Paula. And as you are, there's the group of real estate agents that are licensed in Puerto Rico, and ask the question about, hey, who works with short-term rental investments in Puerto Rico, and just pick their brain and find out where the resources locally and from the different areas that you can find out for the requirements, for any objections that might. There are areas that have so many resorts that they don't allow vacation rentals, or it's harder because that's their competition. So there's been lots of things that have, created roadblocks for short-term rental investors. But then there's some areas that, like, the resorts are owned by individual owners. So it just totally depends. And so definitely doing that research. And one of the best ways that you're going to be able to do that is go into our workplace and talk to the EXP agents that are licensed there and ask those questions. And then you'll find that there's a small handful that probably focus on that, and they'll be able to point you in the right directions for resources for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I remember
Matt.
just a long time ago, one last thing was like on the map, it's like kind of in the northeast portion of the island is where like 75% of all the options are. So that's just something that's like okay, if this is where people already are, there's probably a reason for it. So let's never get too far off of where everyone else is. Because I've always told people that are like, well, what about this XYZ blankety blank weird market? And you're like, okay, let's pull it up on VRBO.
Mhm.
Okay, I see there's 8 vacation rentals in a 50-mile radius. So that's a little concerning. Like why are there only 8 people doing this? And how come like their calendars are blank? So it becomes one of those, like, you can definitely check. You can always be a pioneer in a new area and try something different and new. But if it's like, it's better to almost let someone else figure that out, and then you just kind of follow along
Mhm.
and not be the last person in, but definitely it's a lot riskier to be the first person to go do something in a new area.
I agree.
I was just looking, Paula, there's a Puerto Rico real estate opportunities and tax benefit group. And I find that there's a lot of people posting properties that look like they could be potentially vacation properties in there. So maybe I just joined it so I can invite you, but you can go in there and join it as well and kind of search through, and then you could post something about it. And I'm sure you'd have some people replying. There's like 300 agents in there.
What is the name of it? Is it on the workplace?
It's in the workplace. Yep. It's a group called Puerto Rico Real Estate Opportunities and Tax Benefit is what that particular group is called. There's other ones, but that one in particular looks like a lot of properties that might be maybe investment opportunities are being posted in there. And so that's why it made me think that. But there's also EXP Puerto Rico referrals group that you could join and definitely ask about there. So there's about 4 groups. If you go into workplace and just type in the word Puerto Rico, you'll see like the top 4 groups that you could join.
Okay, I just joined all of them.
Awesome. Cool.
Thank you.
Love it. Matthew, did you have something before we end?
I was going to tell Paula too. I know a lot of some of the top revenue share earners have houses in Puerto Rico because of the tax benefits. So maybe even just reach out to them to ask them about, because I heard a lot of them rent in this one bay, a particular bay. I don't know I'll ask somebody for you, but
it should be the metro area, because that's where like most of the population's at.
Yeah, but maybe you could reach out to them even just for referrals or whatever. So
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Very cool. Okay. So Bill, we're going to go ahead and mark it in the month of June or July. We'll get you back here and we're going to talk some more specifics if people are working with investors and want to invest, maybe how to look at the numbers. And there's been some other topics you suggested. So you guys watch for it because Bill is willing to come back in and talk with us a little bit more specifically about the nitty gritty now that we kind of know some of the areas we might want to be focusing on or talking to our databases and sphere of influence about. So thanks, Bill, for being here as always.
Thank
You guys
Cari.
can find Bill in work chat if you have some questions specifically for him. He does have some cool things going on as far as having referral opportunities, for realtors across the country that come up. So it's good to be connected to Bill if you're interested in this or work with short-term and rental investors. He's a good guy to know within our company. So thanks you guys for joining. We'll see you back here next Monday for revenue share and next Tuesday and Wednesday for our trainings. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.